Sleigh bells ringing, diamonds blinging, carols singing, favorite season. Sleigh bells ringing, diamonds blinging, carols singing, favorite season. They said, say Nick, what you got up in that bag, yeah. I got racks in my sack or in my bag, yeah. They said, say Nick, what you got up in that bag, yeah. I got racks in my sack or in my bag, yeah. Frozen, neck is frozen, catch me rolling, I'm the chosen.
Moving on to a little bit more commentary piece that we have worked up. Something that we want to talk about is the way some things have been treated in the NFL lately. There's been some cases that have been highlighted heavily, while others are really glossed over. And it's almost a tragedy. I have a certain thought process on this, and I'll just go ahead and get into it. Two things I'd like to point out is the media, as we say, big sports media, whoever you want to say, talking heads, all these people, people like Dave Portnoy of Barstool Sports and Aaron Rodgers, the Green Bay Packers, Rodgers being unvaccinated due to COVID. We won't go too much into whether it's right or whether it's wrong, but nonetheless, it's a thing. Rodgers followed the protocols. He did the best he could. He was positive for COVID. He went through that protocol, made it back. He's back playing again. Also, Dave Portnoy, there's many women in the media who come out here and, say, like, he's done them wrong, all kinds of things. And I don't know if these are true or not. And that's not what we're trying to prove here. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is the vast, relentless coverage of these two guys. Everyone, all you hear lately is Rodgers is an anti-vaxxer. He's going to be the death of the NFL. He's this, that, the third. Dave Portnoy, bad guy. Business Insider writes this huge hit piece on him. It doesn't even need to be validated. Everyone just, we take it as gospel. But then on the other side, some examples we pull out. Deshaun Watson case, it was followed briefly, and it came out. But ever since then, more and more and more have come out, and you really don't hear about it as much. Almost nearing 30 women have come out against his sexual assault cases, and we really just don't talk about it. The main news we hear about it is that he could possibly get traded to another team. You have the Dalvin Cook incident, and I don't think necessarily Dalvin Cook is in the wrong here, but that's nonetheless, we don't know if Rodgers or Portnoy were in the wrong either, but Dalvin Cook has a domestic violence incident. A woman claims that Cook assaulted her. Cook claims that she invaded his house, assaulted him and a friend. You don't really know who's right or who's wrong. And Zac Stacy, former Los Angeles Rams running back, the Portnoy example is in here to show that just because you're not part of the league doesn't mean they don't cover it. Zac Stacy brutally beat a woman. It was absolutely horrendous if anyone has seen the video. Brutally beat his girlfriend, longtime girlfriend. But the thing is, the three stories that I just talked about really haven't been covered in the NFL. And I like to take this stance right now. I think the largest problem in the modern day NFL is sexual assault and domestic violence among players. I think it's a breeding ground for things like that. Unfortunately, it seems to pop up more often than not. With the Cowboys, Ezekiel Elliott had some problems. There have been people on Baltimore. You go back way back to Dante Culpepper on the Vikings, Ray Rice and the Ravens, obviously. And I think it's just something that at one point in time, the NFL tried to take a stance on, and then they just way back off of the issue, and they don't talk about it anymore. And I just think it's disgraceful that we talk about whether someone was vaccinated for COVID or not and crucify them, or baseless claims about how somebody sleeping with somebody and whether or not it was in a non negotiable manner or whatever. The story is really vague on both ends. But then people who like beat women or get into these domestic incidents, and we just ignore it. It's not great.
Yeah, and it's almost, to me, I think it's a collusion between NFL and the big media, and I want to dig deep into this a little bit. So, what is Aaron Rodgers in terms of the media in the NFL? He's kind of just he was sort of Brady with the Patriots. He doesn't say a whole lot. He's kind of keeps close to the vest. He's not much of a public persona. In the offseason, he kept kind of quiet, doing his thing with his fiance and all that. The one exception is he goes on the Pat McAfee show and interviews all the time with them. And he's open in how much he supports and really likes that show and what they do. So what is Rodgers? He blatantly and continuously just shoves it to the NFL and the media that covers the NFL. It's the same thing with Portnoy. Portnoy with Barstool Sports has created a sort of counter movement to big sports media, right? Because when we think of ESPN and CBS and NBC, it's all like really buttoned up, right? All the time they're wearing suits and ties. It's all clean cut. It's all very like, we joke fancy suits, fancy sets, hot takes, all that good stuff. Barstool Sports is the exact opposite. It's very rough. It's very blunt. It's very direct. It's kind of like a lot of what Americana is, right? It's a little not perfect, a lot of rough around the edges, but it's honest and forthright, and it's what people want. Obviously, it's a very successful media company. But the NFL and the media that's colluding with the NFL sees both Rodgers through his actions not working through their channels and Portnoy and Barstool Sports as a threat, as an alternative to their oligopoly that they've created, right? Because it's basically ESPN, the NFL, and NFL Network, and now Fox a little bit. But it's basically just those guys that control that space, that sports media space, and it's been that way for so long. But Rodgers represents a threat to that. Portnoy represents a threat to that. And the NFL gets a huge part of its money, right? How much of these deals it gets through Fox and ABC and ESPN for all these sporting events? That's so much of the league's revenue is these television contracts. So you better believe the NFL and these big media companies are colluding, working together, trying to come up with the best deal for them so that way there is no competition. NFL has to go through NFL stories. Every single one of them, every single player has to go through these big media outlets. They do not like it when they circumvent it and go around. That's why shows like Pat McAfee, Barstool Sports, they view them as threats. And that's why the NFL colluding with the big medias is attacking them. These issues, these incidences, these allegations of Watson, Stacy, and Dalvin Cook, they aren't a threat to the NFL's bottom line. Let's be honest. Like you said, there's been a lot of incidences over the years with NFL. I talked to my fiance about this when I brought up the Dalvin Cook allegation, and her response was, that's sort of an every season thing, right? A couple times a year, an NFL player gets, allegedly charged with some kind of domestic abuse thing. It doesn't hurt the bottom line. People still tune in to watch the games. So the NFL doesn't see that as a threat. I agree with you. It's dastardly, right? That's not how it should be. Those issues should be treated much more seriously than they are, because these guys are supposed to be, representative of the league. They're employees, very, out in the face of everyone sees them. They're celebrities essentially. But the NFL doesn't see that as a threat to their bottom line and their business model. They see Portnoy and Rodgers and athletes like Rodgers who don't go through media channels as threats to that model. And unfortunately, that's why they're attacking them.
And another thing I would like to see here, and the big issue that I have with this, is what did the NFL do? They hear that Rodgers was unvaccinated. They launch a full-scale investigation into the matter. Not too much had come from it, but they do the digging. They go through the dirty work. They make sure that he was doing what he was supposed to do while he was in the organization. They slightly reprimand him for not wearing his mask when he is talking to the media, so on, so forth. But it's scrupulously gone through and brought out in front of the public to say, hey, look. And now here's my counterpoint. I think Dalvin Cook's life should be upended. I think they should look through it and with a fine-tuned comb and make sure that this event is how he says it was. And if it is, he should be exonerated to the fullest extent. They should come out and say, listen, we've looked into the Dalvin Cook incident. It's not what it seems. And he is 100% good to go. I think Deshaun Watson's case, them not wanting to take a side in this and not wanting to look into that case at all absolutely disgraceful. I think they should be having tons of private investigators in there going through, making their own assumptions. I think that they should, if they want to take a stance, go through, figure out what happened. You can do it with much less red tape than police or anybody else could. Go through, make your judgment calls, and either cut them and move on, or say, hey, we did our investigation as to what we found. It wasn't a big enough deal for us to keep going, and we're gonna let them play. Like, we're gonna let them go. But they just don't take a stance at all on it. And I don't see how you can take a stance in the grand scheme of things on something that is so little versus something that has affected over almost 30 women's lives.
And again, I agree with you, but I think it just goes back to just the collusion between NFL and these big media companies that they have these big deals with. Basically, I'm pretty sure how this goes is the media communicates to the NFL, hey, here's what we care about. And the NFL makes sure to pump them stories related to that. The Gruden thing is a great example. The NFL, obviously the media, when they saw those emails, the way everything is social justice and all that now these days, political correctness, the moment those Gruden emails hit, were even thought of being conceived, the media wanted that and they wanted to destroy Gruden. The NFL was very happy to comply with the media, right? Because they need that relationship between those two entities to be good. That's the NFL's entire model. The fact of the matter remains is that as long as the allegations against Dalvin Cook and the allegations against Deshaun Watson aren't a threat to the NFL's public image, the way they see it, the NFL doesn't care. Now, that's wrong. Frankly, that's a terrible thing to have. Now, I'm not saying that Dalvin Cook should be punished, right? Because these are just allegations. But at the same time, don't investigate Aaron Rodgers so scrupulously, like you said. Don't dig in on, go through the Green Bay Packers organization, their day-to-day processes, trying to find every little and tiny flaw with any violation of COVID protocols that Green Bay may have committed. If you're just going to completely ignore Watson and Cook, this hypocrisy that the NFL is showing, we can see right through it. And that's exactly why I think companies like Barstool and Portnoy are so successful, because we can all see this. We all know what's going on here. We know the NFL is focusing on certain stories because they're pumped that with the media. It's a real shame. And I agree with you. It's bad, but until those incidents start affecting the NFL's image and their bottom line, I don't think we're going to see a change.
And hey, what can you do? All we can do is talk about it and bring awareness to it. But outside of that, they have to be the ones to take the next step. But that's good, and I'm glad we've talked about all these things.